And it's a pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Harris. The floor is yours. You're heartily welcome.
God morgen, meine Damen und Herren. Norske min sträcker dessvärre bara så långt. Resten av föredraget vill därför bli på engelsk. So the Railway Consultancy does some timetabling work and some commercial planning work, including bidding. So I've been coming to Norway since 1999, so I'm very familiar with the railway here. I've been on most of the network. I've been to hell. I've been to Paradise. It was snowing in Paradise. So I published some years ago an analysis of the privatization of British Rail, and I've been asked to speak today because I've been asked to speak on a train operator's perspective. Worked here also for Ruta and the Ministry and for nearly every one of the British train companies. So you're starting your process of railway reform, and I think it's interesting to know what you can learn from European neighbours. I will say something about Britain, and also from some other countries. And because we work all over the place, so I'm a bit tired this morning. I've just come back from Colombia, so I'm still a bit jet-lagged, but it does give one a wide perspective, which we can talk independently. And your conference organisers asked me to answer two questions. How has the market changed? And what should the government do? And I hope to provide some answers. So what's changed? This is almost like one of David's pictures. We need to say something about traffic levels. In many countries in Europe, demand has gone up. It's gone down in a few, but most of this demand is driven by economic conditions. I don't know how you feel in Norway, but actually most countries have got richer in the last 20 years. We've also had some network changes. Again, thank you, David, for showing a picture of the Borders Railway. If you open a new line, you get new passengers. A little, and it is only a small proportion, reflects liberalisation or changes in the industry. In Eastern Europe, we've seen some problems as people are offered other options. But I know that in Norway and in Britain, young adults are learning to drive later. You have a big market there. And urban redevelopment is something that's obvious to me. So this picture here, NSB Property has built all of these office blocks since I've been coming to Oslo, and they will have an impact on people wanting to go to Oslo S. Then, of course, there's money. At the moment, many countries don't have much money, especially Greece. But there is commercial pressure. We have to understand that. And there is the European Union who've been bringing forward legislation about how the railway should be run, with tendering in many countries. This is the Alex operation in Germany. How have we been working in the industry? Well, I must be honest with you. When the railways were privatised in Britain, there were some problems at first. We must acknowledge that. But over the years, people started to work better with each other. It is very common for train operators in Britain to share the same control centre room as our infrastructure authority. There are problems from elsewhere, but we have to ask why. So Railtrack, our infrastructure authority, was renationalised because it didn't maintain its assets properly. Its replacement network rail has been given a crucial role in terms of looking at performance across all train operators. Now, because I'm not quite 2 meters tall, couldn't quite see over this wall at London Bridge, you'll have to forgive the picture. If you look carefully, the train on the left belongs to South Eastern. The train in the middle belongs to Thameslink. The train on the right belongs to Southern. And if you've got very good eyesight from the back, you should be able to see two others in the background. So performance is very important. Who's going to be in charge of that? Most of what I want to talk about is how you provide a fair market. I went to Rome a few years ago and happened to get this picture of the Italian high-speed operator, an independent company. How do we get these people to prosper. I think there are some things we must understand. Please remember that there will not necessarily be an improvement in the finances of your railway. It may be true that the private sector will improve efficiency. However, two other things happen. We add interface costs. Companies have a cost in dealing with another company. They have to send them an invoice. Hopefully somebody pays it. There are profit margins that have to be added. Now, I did some research in Britain, and it's been quoted in Hansard, in our government thing, about £850 million a year, maybe 10% of the entire industry costs were added by splitting our railway up into lots of pieces. Now, of course, you offset that against how more efficient the new situation may be. But new operators will look at risks, and they will add a bit of price for that. And you may, of course, increase the quality of your train services. So I cannot entirely predict the outcome for Norway, but I can say that where the starting position has been different, the results have been different. David commented that we've had a problem with railway image in Britain, and British Rail had a bad image. But actually, if you look at the figures, it was the third most efficient railway in Europe. And it's been quite difficult to improve that in terms of efficiency. On the other hand, whilst you may rate them as a good railway, the German railway has managed to reduce its costs in the last 10 years, although sometimes at the expense of how much money is paid to staff, and I'm sure the unions have something to say about that. What else do you need to do? Well, I'm going to start with some quite small things. You actually need to get the data right. Different people need to share vehicle maintenance records, timetabling details, how many passengers you carried. And it's no use if they're operating in Excel and they're in Microsoft Access. Even little things like that don't help. What are your standards? Do you actually have a market for rolling stock? Now, I'm intrigued by your proposals to have a government agency with rolling stock. As demand is rising here, you will need more and more. And it's helpful if a train operator has some choice. Maybe their view of what is needed on Rørosbanen, for example, is not the same as the train that's currently there. So you perhaps need to think a bit about that. And in letting franchises, what do we need to do? Well, I would recommend that you have a range of opportunities. And I mean partly by size, but also by type. Most franchises might be what I would call net cost, where an operator has both impact for cost and revenue. But in an urban area like Oslo, you might instead have a concession where the revenues are passed straight back to the authority. So maybe some differences is helpful. From an economic point of view, railways have lots of economies of density. How many trains and passengers can I get on the same route? That's more important than scale. But look, very small franchises are not likely to be optimal. So I was reassured to learn in Norway that you're perhaps not going to have as many as 8 franchises that was once talked about, but somewhat fewer. There was some academic research done about 20 years ago which found the optimum size for a train company. And it's about the size of Belgium or the Netherlands. Britain has far more railway than that. You have much more track, but not actually more railway demand. So the case for splitting up into lots of parts is not good. Into a couple, maybe that's better. We have an opposite problem. I'm sure David has lots of correspondence from people who run these trains. This is a franchise that was recently created by adding 2 other ones. And quite frankly, it's probably too big to manage. It carries about 10% of the national rail services in Britain, so it's carrying about 3 and a bit times more passengers than the whole of Norway on a very congested network, and I'm sure they're trying, but at the moment they're not entirely succeeding. What else might a train operator want? They want understanding of a process. Are they going to get their money? If I'm going to run a train service in Norway, I'd like to know that I'm going to be paid, every 3 weeks on Thursday or whatever the That matters. You can't have uncertainty about that. The government needs to set out what it wants to do, clearly. And I'm sure both in Norway and everywhere else, you read some government documents, they're not always clear. So what does the government want? If we're going to invest in your railway, are you buying quality? Are you buying speed? Are you buying nice staff? What do you actually want? And this balance between price and quality is quite important. In our bidding in Britain, the government issues a ratio between price and quality. And my personal feeling is that at the moment we're concentrating too much on price and not enough on quality, which may be why David gets so many letters. Of course, there's a balance between being rigid and being flexible. There may be reasons why you should change policy from time to time, but people don't always think of the consequences. And a really bad example recently, the government of Slovakia decided to impose free travel for children and pensioners on all train operators, as a result of which 2 of the open access operators have had to stop running. That's not a good government policy if you don't reimburse them in some fashion. So if you're going to do something drastic, let's just think through what the consequences are. But keep it simple. I'm a great believer in that American phrase, keep it simple, stupid. Have few regulations, but simple regulations. So here's one for you. If you want to run a commercial train service in Britain, like Grand Central here, there is a rule that you must not take more than 70% of your forecast demand from other operators. So we all understand that. That's the rule. I'm currently working for someone who wants to be a train operator, and at the moment our sums show that 70.2% of the demand will be taken from other people, so there's no point submitting the application. We are trying to work out how we can do better. But as already been mentioned, my Norwegian is not good, but I'm fairly sure that the Minister mentioned this, infrastructure is important. Any train service supplier is determined about the infrastructure. Can you get a train path? If I look at Britain, Network Rail is still a bit weak on customer service. Not really good at responding quickly to things, doing the little things. And my experience in Norway is Jernbaneforum is a bit similar. For example, who takes into account the commercial consequences to train operators of when we dig up the line? I'm not sure that's working perfectly in Norway. And look, this is a safety problem. I reported in 2007. And it's still there this morning because I took another photograph of the same thing this morning. Train operators in your new environment will not accept this, particularly if you want high quality operators, maybe someone like MTR from Hong Kong. They're going to expect more. And I'm going to come back to that. It's important. How else do you provide a fair market? Now, I think, David said it was the first time in Norway. I think this is the 21st time I've been here, and I'm beginning to understand some things about Norway. Collaboration matters in Scandinavian culture, as far as I can see. David's from Manchester. You know, we can have a kind of direct discussion. It's fine. But I get the impression that perhaps that's not here, how it works. But I haven't seen your friendliness to each other actually fix all the problems that people acknowledge in the railways here. For example, LSB at the moment doesn't pay any track access charges. So why should Jernbaneforum behave in a way which benefits passengers? Because it might cost them more money. And it's all very well asking nicely, but maybe something has to change there. And we've had situations in Britain, I've used the IA for Infrastructure Authority, any payments made back to the train operator to reflect no track, for example, we need to make sure that they actually flow back through to passengers. And I'm sure David's had letters about that, where that's not happened. So this is all part of the fairness. But there are some good things that I would like to recommend to you that we have done in Britain, as well as the mistakes we have made. The best thing in Britain is the system of regulation we have. We have an independent railway regulator who is advised by a team of expert engineers who sit down every 5 years. Well, they don't sit down, they actually go and look at the track and work out, this is how much money we must spend on maintenance, and this is how much we must spend on repairs. And if your network is in a good state of repair, every train operator in the world will go, well, that's interesting, I might operate there. It provides safety for the train operator and reliability for passengers. And I think it is important, so I'm not convinced this happens in Norway. If anyone in the audience has, great experience here, they can try guessing where these places are. I'll tell them in the break. But this set of main staircase from a station in Norway, I would regard that as dangerous. And this is a friend of mine. Classic tripping hazard. Who's sorting that stuff out in Norway? And I'm deliberately being a bit harsh here because people from abroad will go, I might be responsible for that. A passenger might sue me. So there are concerns, I think, from outside. So there's one of these slides, I've now changed my title slightly. We want fairness in the market. People from abroad may look for how they can make a profit. Now let's be honest, few railways in the world make a profit. My analysis suggests that the only really profitable railway in Norway is between Drammen and Gardermoen. That's fine, that's quite normal. But we can still make a profit by supplying something or other. I can clean your trains, maintain them, or maybe operate them. But the risks, it's about who has the risks. One of the things that is quite clear is that train operators don't control the macroeconomy, the price of oil. In fact, your government probably doesn't control the price of oil either. But there's no point in asking a train operator to deal with the consequences of that. So our latest franchises have an economic element that effectively is held by the government, so the train operator is not responsible for some things that are way out different. And if you're worried about a train operator making too much money, there are ways in which you can limit that and they're forced to give some money back if they make too much. But do devise a clear system which balances money and quality. I think one of the problems we've seen in Britain, if you emphasize money too much, things get cheaper, but they also gradually get worse. And again, if we look at the GTR franchise in Britain, the same company won it with a lower bid. They took out a lot of management. Do you know, some managers actually do something useful. And if you don't employ them, some things don't happen. And it's showing. So be worried about taking the lowest bid. So in terms of, I think, how you succeed overall, yes, we're lucky. We have more traffic. We have a more commercial atmosphere. If you get the infrastructure sorted and the right amount of regulation, simple but enforced, with the infrastructure sorted and David's passengers taken into account, if you give a range of priorities and opportunities to companies from around the world, you'll get some interesting bids and people to run your railways, but don't ask them to deal with the macroeconomy. Thank you.